Great. Well, thanks for coming out. I want to preface this by saying I do know Ben a little bit. So if we exchange in shorthand sometimes, you know, that's the explanation. I've known him since he was a child, and Charlie, I'm a huge fan of. And I wanted to sort of, the idea I think for doing this would be, while I think a lot of people think that they know who these two guys are, I don't know that that's true. And so I wanted to go a little more in depth and sort of who they are as people and as artists and where this record is coming from. So I guess the first question, which I find interesting, is how you two met initially, because it has this sort of almost mythical quality to me. And so I'm wondering if you guys could sort of talk about who introduced you and how that happened.
Well, in 1993, John Lee Hooker was playing at a little club in Mill Valley, California called the Sweetwater, and Ben was opening, and John Lee had asked me to come sit in with him, which we were real good friends, so he often asked me to come play with him if I wasn't busy. And that's where we all met.
Yeah.
That was the first meeting.
And was it at his suggestion that you guys initially played together?
Whose suggestion? I don't know whose idea it was that you opened.
Well, yeah, I got the opening gig, got the call from John Lee, and we were at the same agency, so it just was a clear fit. And I remember being in the room. I knew I was going to be opening for John Lee, and while that was clear, I had no idea Charlie was going to be there. So I walked into the room and saw both of them, and jaw hit the floor. And I just knew it was going to be a special night, and they welcomed me, and I was absolutely I was green. I was a peon at that time, and they were still so good to me. It was a special moment. And that introduction then grew into Charlie and I crossing paths at different shows and festivals and being on the same circuit. And then soon we got the call from John Lee to record with him. That was about 96, 97.
Yeah, an album called Just Friends.
Best of Friends, I think.
Best of Friends, and that's where we really locked in.
That's where it began.
And even John Lee, after we got through recording, said, "Man, you guys got to record more together," you know.
Charlie, you could hear him on the end of the song. At the end, you and I are resonating our two notes, and they kind of become one haunted sound. And John Lee is on the record going, "Sounds like a freight train coming through here," and they kept that on the recording.
The tune stops. We still have our headphones on, and John Lee goes, "Whoa, what's that?"
It sounds just like it.
And so how did that experience eventually end up with you guys like formally playing together and recording together?
Well, since John said that it was such a good idea to do that, and we obviously knew he was right.
Yeah.
And we kept talking about it for years, but we were so busy. The problem was finding a time when we would both be off at the same time. And boy, when we finally got into the studio, it's like all those tunes were really restless and couldn't.
It's like the music said to us, like, "What took you so long?" Felt like that to me anyway, and I hadn't felt like that before. Like the music said to us, like, "What took you two so long?" Like, it's about time. And just one more thing about John Lee, he was a man of few words, I think it was fair to say. And so when he looked at me straight, you know, with the dark glasses on, kind of just went, "Hey, you and Charlie have something here. You two, you should play with Charlie more. You and Charlie." And that always stuck with me because he never really gave me any more life instruction than that. So that was a big deal.
And I want to, with you, Charlie, I just want to know if you can sort of tell these people, like your formative years were in Memphis, and then you moved to Chicago. And I'm wondering if you can explain to these people why you moved to Chicago in the first place, and then if we can sort of talk a little bit about what you found there.
Well, the only reason I went to Chicago was just looking for a job in a factory, because that's all I knew about Chicago. It was like this great big town way up north with lots of factory work that paid well and had lots of benefits. And friends of mine had gone up and gotten a job, and they'd come back to visit in a brand new big red Oldsmobile or something. And I kept thinking about, yeah, I got to get up and get me one of them jobs. But I never thought about there was a blues scene there, because I'd been told that all entertainers either lived in New York or Hollywood. So to me, this was just a big factory town up north. But when I got there, boy, did my eyes get opened.
And so, you know, you started going to clubs, right, and catching all these artists that you knew about, and I'm wondering, you know, at that time, were those clubs fairly segregated, and was it odd for you to be there, or was it normal, or?
Well, I'd already learned how to play in Memphis and drink, so it's a common pastime in Memphis. But when I got up to Chicago, I wasn't promoting myself or wanting to sit in, or I just was hanging out, and I'd request tunes, and all these guys thought of me as a fan. And there were no other, rarely would you see any white people. Sometimes a bunch of kids from the University of Chicago would park as close as they could to the front door and all run in together in a group, tight little group, with their eyes real big, looking all around real scared. And I'm sitting at the bar thinking, oh no, don't come talk to me. You know? So that was the beginning of hanging out in the blues clubs in Chicago.
And how did you go from hanging out to actually playing?
Well, a waitress that I got to know pretty well told Muddy, "Boy, you ought to hear Charlie play harmonica." And Muddy was like, "Charlie plays harmonica?" Well, next thing I know, he's calling me up to sit in, and that changed everything, because a lot of musicians hung out at Pepper's Lounge, which was Muddy's home club when he wasn't on the road, because he lived right around the corner. And people started offering me gigs. Say, "Hey, come on by Wednesday night at this place, man. We can pay you a few bucks." And pay me a few bucks? What? So that got my attention, because that was my ticket out of the factory and my ticket to fun.
One of the things that I think you guys have in common at different places and at different times was that you were both sort of musical seekers, like looking for records, finding new music. And now, Ben, you grew up, you know, sort of amongst musicians. With, you know, your family was musicians. You had the folk music center. But were there records that you went outside of your comfort zone to find? I mean, you know, whether it was like, you know, looking like whether it was hip hop or what other genres that you went out and looked for?
Yeah, after mistreating my mom's record collection severely, she bought me a Radio Shack realistic turntable. I think it had built-in speakers, and gave me a little lunch money and said, "Okay, you've got to go pick out your own records. You've got your own record player, because this is getting ridiculous. My records are all coming up scratched." And the first record I bought was Smash Hits, with the cover of Hendrix on the front with the 3 different hand positions. And that was and I don't know what pulled me to buy it, but something, I don't know, what was a 9-year-old doing buying a Hendrix record, but that's what I did. And that introduced me to a whole world of music, rock and alternative at that time period. That was that exploration, and that was the cross-pollination of my love for blues and rock and roll. And then in my teenage years, it was the first wave, well, maybe the second wave of hip-hop, which was my music, That was my voice and my music from my teenage years. That represented my rebellion and my voice. So that, I caught the tail end of the Sugar Hill Gang, which then segued into all things hip hop with, EPMD and Run DMC and Houdini and the Beastie Boys.
And Charlie, we talked once and you were talking about looking through like going to like old antique stores and finding records. And I'm wondering, like, besides the blues, if there were other types of music that you sort of felt a relationship with.
Well, I was just, in these old junk stores of records, these 78s were like a nickel or a dime, and I'm just looking for blues. But if I saw anything that looked interesting, I just get that too, to take home, listen to it, just to see what it sounded like. So I discovered a lot of music from around the world that the scales they were using kind of reminded me of blues. And after a while, I got to realizing that maybe every culture around the world has its music of lament. They're all singing about "my baby left me." It's a worldwide situation. So everybody's got the blues, really. They might not call it that in another country, but that's what we call it. It's the same theme, though.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how these because you both have like both played in different genres of music and experimented with different influences, and in a record like this, which is a blues record, does that still come into the sound?
I guess all my influences, either consciously or subconsciously, surface from time to time. That's what happens with me. I don't know. It's a good question. It's hard to say.
You, Ben?
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece as far as the influence and other influences that you filter through your voice and how it ends up being a part of your main genre of interest or genre of commitment. In my family's music store growing up as a kid, this was before there was no world music. There was just music from around the world in the 70s. And as you know as well as I do, that music store is a explosion of influence from music all around the world, and it's our 60th anniversary this year. We've had the doors open and family run for 60 years, 5 generations working the cash register. Me specifically at the holiday time. And man, I think people come into the music store and give me a little bit more abuse because like, oh, you left town, didn't you? So now you're going to change the A string on my kid's violin. So there's a certain mandatory humility when I'm back working in the music store around the holidays, and it's great. I love it. But a little bit off topic, just to say that, and literature and literary references, I don't quote poetry and poets and things like that, but on the shelves at my house was, the Joy of Yiddish cookbook, the Crucible, the play The Crucible, Arthur Miller and Alex Haley's Roots would be in a row, and so that's how I grew up.
And so this is like, it's a blues record, but I'm wondering if in doing a record that's a sort of a genre record, is there some sort of liberating feel to doing that in terms of creatively? Like you don't have to worry about, reinventing something so that it becomes more of an emotional exercise?
For me, the blues was the music that motivated me and inspired me and hit me like a thunderbolt and brought me to my instrument and set my life's course. As much as I've been in throughout so many other genres, getting to work with Charlie it's coming home. It's where I started. It's the first music where I was recognized for doing something that had the chance of possibly being unique. And the blues has a way of taking care of its own, and that Muddy had Charlie up on stage in a very special way. That's a stretch. for Mud to say, hey, you're with me, come on up, at a young age. I can only imagine what that would have been like for Muddy Waters to invite you on stage, irregardless of color or culture or age. Either you can play or you can't. And that's what Taj Mahal did for me when I was a kid. Taj invited me up and invited me out on tour when I was a 22-year-old steel guitar player, and he said, hey man, you're with me. You're and it's the genre that discovered me and that I discovered, and it changed my life. So to work with Charlie again, it's the arrival and full circle place to land.
Now I'm wondering, you guys have been playing together for a while, and I'm wondering if your relationship has changed and that has affected the music. I mean, because you guys have been friends for a while and you spent a lot of time together. And I'm wondering how that is reflected in this new record specifically.
Well, anytime you spend a couple of years on the road with somebody,
Yeah.
you're going to know them a whole lot better at
That's
the end
the
of those 2 years. So, and a lot of it along the way was just confirming our suspicions.
That's right. And make no mistake, nobody ever will know me. I'm impossible to know. The only people that really know me, 2 ex-wives, my wife, my 5 kids, my mother, and my 2 brothers are the only people that will ever know me. And I wish it weren't so, and I wish I weren't so guarded. It's just who I am. But outside of that, the only person that knows me is Charlie.
And Ben knows me like few people, except Henrietta.
And Charlie, in playing with Ben, I mean, has your actual playing evolved in your sort of musical relationship with him?
I like to think I've been evolving since the day I started playing as a kid. And anytime I play with, if I'm playing with my own band, I'm not going to be learning so much because they're just backing me up and I'm just playing what I know. But when I'm with Ben, I'm listening to him and I'm sparking off his ideas, and it's giving me new ideas, and it's a growth period, really.
Same.
So it's really exciting on many levels, but that's one of them.
And Ben, in terms of writing lyrics and writing these songs, how is it different than when you're writing a record for yourself, when you're anticipating that this is something you're going to play with the 2 of you?
When I'm writing for myself, I have as high a standard as possible, but you can only elevate yourself by yourself so far and so high. And hopefully that's high. Hopefully that's good enough to get you to a seat at the table. But when I'm aiming towards working and writing around Charlie and the sound of his harp, it's like All-Star Weekend, NBA All-Star. It's got to be something else. And again, just like Charlie said, he pushes me to grow as a lyricist in a way that I couldn't otherwise.
I mean, both of you guys are incredible musicians, and I think you could just rely on that. But what I see in this record is something that's really intensely emotional and personal, and so you've sort of transcended the playing to create something that has a narrative and talks about your lives. And I think it's interesting because, neither of you nor me are, particularly young, so you've lived life. And it feels like to me that it comes through in this record. And I'm wondering if you can sort of talk about whether this is autobiographical or if it's, what it is to you guys, what it represents.
That was for me.
You.
Yeah, no, we have that, but neither one of us want to step on each other, so it's, yeah.
For me, it's really exciting because blues is important to me it's almost like a philosophy or a way of looking at life. It's actually more than just another kind of music. It's not a fad. And to see it accessible today, not a rehash of like a Muddy Waters tune from 1953, which a lot of people do, and that's okay, but it's great and refreshing and means a lot to me to see it's still got the core feeling that makes it real blues, but it's brand new of today and of the 21st century, and it just means that the blues is alive and well and tough as hell, and you can't kill it. It's going to keep on going.
Well, I mean, talk a little bit about some of the lyrics and the songs. I mean, because there's a certain sense of reflection in these songs.
Yeah, for sure. With there's sight, sound, taste, touch, scent. Art reminds us that as human beings, there is a sixth sense, and that's intuition. And art's supposed to bring out the best in our intuitions as human beings. As far as I'm concerned, in the blues, you can't fool the blues. And either it's blue or it's not. And this record, lyrically, this record exhausted me, Jay. I've never been lyrically exhausted in my life. My second record's done by the time I get, my next record is usually done by the time I'm finished with the record I'm working on. Just because it's been my natural course. And I never lift pen up from paper, I never do. Every conversation I ever have, every book I ever read, it's all working its way into becoming a song. My life is a song filter, a lyrical filter. But this is the first record that lyrically exhausted me. I got nothing after this one. At the moment. But I'm still, I think we're both probably sidestepping your question. How personal is it? And if a record's not personal when you write it, it is once you've recorded it. Everything you say is, and the danger and the power in the unconscious. Are you trying to tell yourself something? Are you reading into the future about how you want to live or where you may be going? Lyrics, the blues when it's at its best is about the past, present. Blues when at its best is about the past, present, and the future. And I there's not a word or a syllable in this record that hasn't either been lived or been lived by someone incredibly close to me.
And it gives you where to go.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's an intensity, an emotional intensity in this record. I mean, beyond the playing, which is noticeable. One of the things I wanted to ask you about your playing is that, to go back, when I was talking about influences, one of the things that I hear in your playing is there's a phrasing that while it's blues, you can hear like a jazz quality to it, and I'm wondering, is that just something that comes out of who you are, or is that deliberate? Or, I mean, especially on this record, there's phrasing that's really fascinating to me.
Well, that's interesting. I have no idea what I sound like to anybody else. So I wish I could put your head on and listen to myself and say, oh.
I'm sure somebody here could arrange that.
Well, maybe
we are at
not
Google.
today.
Yeah, we are.
But I've listened to all kinds of music, gospel, and growing up in Memphis, I heard a lot of rockabilly and gospel and blues, and it all meant something to me. And I listened to a lot of jazz, especially after I got to Chicago. There was a lot of jazz all over Chicago, on the jukeboxes, in the blues clubs, Jack McDuff and guys like that. And they're playing, they say they're jazz, but everything they're playing is blues, except for the ballads they did. Like Grant Green is a jazz guitar player, but many of his riffs, they just fit right on the harmonica perfectly. So I got a lot of ideas listening to jazz players. And a lot of those guys that come in and sit in with us, we go sit in with them. There's a lot of crossover in Chicago.
And like both of you have had these sort of fascinating careers because you're not born out of one particular musical movement. I mean, I'm aware of like, you show up in San Francisco in the 60s and you're playing the Fillmore, but you're not a hippie by any means, but they're responding to you. And at the, in the same way, Ben, you've played, like different types of music, but you're not identified with one thing. And people, sometimes I think they don't really know.
Oh, no, make no mistake about it, man. I am the only living human being that's opened up for Metallica and Marilyn Manson and John Lee Hooker.
That's an accomplishment, yeah. So there are benefits, and I'm wondering if if that sort of quality that you both have, which is that you've sort of transcended particular genres, is it a positive or do you see it as a negative, and how it affects what you do?
I think it's a huge positive. If it's a way to pull people in and expose them to something and treat them to something new they hadn't heard before, it'll be with them for the rest of their life. That's the nature of blues. It'll get you through life. It's your buddy when you're up, and it's your comforter when you're down.
Emmett, before I go into, before I touch on that in particular, do you mind if I just dip back to the lyrics for a second?
Yeah.
Like, man,
Please.
It's hard to have a lyric that says, there's a price we pay for the places we lay, for putting it all on the line. So far down, the only sound is something leaving you behind. Like, you can't write that and not have, you know what I mean? Like, so it is some personal shit.
Yeah.
Like, you got to, you don't have to suffer to play the blues, but it fucking helps.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, damn right it's personal. This shit is as personal as I've ever been. It's raw. I may as well, burn my diary. Really, in a way. I mean, it is kind of that gnarly. I may as well just walk on stage every night, burn up my life on pages and walk off. But if the blues isn't that, don't waste anybody's time.
Well, how does that feel to put that out there? Like,
It's actually just rehearsing. We've been rehearsing for the last 3 days, and man, even just, I'm a shell, dude. I'm a shell, even just from rehearsing these songs. So I gotta pace myself for sure. I gotta like, eat my dark leafy greens and my.
And are there any particular songs that feel like that are incredibly cathartic on this album?
Yeah, The Bottle Wins Again, and having to bring that to the surface as far as wrestling that into submission. I'm a year sober, which feels great. Bought myself a big cake to celebrate. And all of them, man, all of them kind of, they weigh heavy in their own. These days I speak in whispers, travel only to and from. Come close, you'll see the red of a well-bitten tongue. My family had to survive through McCarthyism and was chased from coast to coast, for not dropping names. My grandfather wouldn't drop names, so he got fired and chased after by the powers that be, and couldn't stay in the town he lived because it couldn't work when you're blacklisted, right? So That's how I ended up in Southern California, because my grandfather dug ditches from East Coast to West because he couldn't get a job because he wouldn't name names. I don't know how I got onto that, but.
It's good. The sense that I get.
Oh, no, to finish the thought, these days I speak in whispers, travel only to and from. Come close, you'll see the red of a well-bitten tongue. The righteous, the wretched, the holy, and the damned. Is there no mercy in this land? And it is as merciless a time in sociopolitical history as we've been in, at least in my lifetime. All of it weighs heavy in its own way as far as being either about or around what we're going through, you hope.
Well, do you think that, is an optimistic record? Is there hope in there?
I think even asking the question, is there no mercy in this land, is optimistic, because it reminds us that should be, home of the brave, land of the free. There should be a third line that has something to do with mercy, as far as I'm concerned.
Blues is always optimistic. Even though
'Cause
we might be talking about times are tough, the nature of blues is we'll get through this. We can do it. We're tough.
So we should open it up to questions now, and we can't really see out there, but is there anybody that has particular questions for these guys?
My grandpa's a big Johnny Cash fan, so I understand that you maybe spent some time together in Memphis. Can you maybe just talk about the influence that listening to Johnny Cash had on you and how his style maybe plays into, the work that you've done?
Great question.
What was the question?
Yeah.
Who did I know in Memphis?
Johnny Cash.
What about Johnny Cash?
Just your experience listening to him growing up around
Oh, I used to see him around Memphis. His brother, Tommy, we went to high school together. Tommy was on the basketball team.
I mean, there's a Johnny and a Tommy Cash in this one. Sorry.
And actually, there was an older brother named Roy that had a radio show every Saturday for 15 minutes, a little hillbilly show. Anyhow, Johnny would come to the high school basketball games to see Tommy, along with Dewey Phillips, a local madman DJ. So yeah, I saw a lot of Johnny at the basketball games, along with a lot of other local rockabilly guys and stuff, Charlie Feathers and people like that.
Was his, I think, to paraphrase, was his music ever an influence on you?
Johnny Cash's music? Oh, I had everything he issued on Sun. And then when he moved on to Columbia, I had everything for a while, and then it kind of... But yeah, I was a huge fan. I even recorded a version of Big River, for what it's worth.
Both of you as musicians have inspired so many people. I mean, even just before we started, people were saying how this song got me through that, or like this inspired me to do that. As artists, what inspires you?
Who? Me?
Both of you. Because your music has been so inspirational to other people. What inspires you?
You mean like a particular tune or artist or anything in life? Or?
Anything. Rainbows, music, TV, whatever.
Fear inspires me.
That is a wonderful...
Blues always... When I was a little kid, I was an only child of a single mom who would get up in the morning when it was dark and ride 3 buses to work, and then 3 buses home, and it'd be dark when she got back. So I was alone all the time. And when I would hear blues is just in the environment. It was my comforter. It made me feel better. And that's the beginning for me. The blues helped me feel okay about myself.
And before I answer your question, if I could just double back again, because
Sure.
it is so conversational having known John all my life, but how it's affected me being as eclectic of a career, how that's come into play. I wouldn't have it any other way. It's brought me to where I am today. It hasn't been easy because it's you sidestep. There's a certain comfort in knowing how an artist is going to sound or how a band is going to sound from first song to last, from one record to another, and that's never been for me. So it's made it super challenging, but at the end of the day, as we were discussing on the way here, you're just so fortunate to have people at all from one record to another, whether you're eclectic or not. So I've always had let the music lead the charge, and celebrated the eclectic nature of my musical interests.
One of the things I'd add...
Sorry, Moni, I'll be right.
Yeah, is that in collaborating with people, and especially with Charlie, it seems to have kept an immediacy and keeping you inspired in some way. So you're not just sort of, doing the same record over in different ways.
It served me in that way.
Yes.
For sure. And, usually one record inspires the next in my life, but this is the first record I feel every record I've ever made has gone into this one.
I would just say, from my point of view, I've never seen Ben as excited about a record as this one, and you've made a few records, and so I think to be experiencing that right now is it's a testament to the record and a testament to the collaboration, and it's pretty amazing.
If you'd known me as long as you know Ben, you'd say, I've never seen Charlie so excited either.
There we go.
I'm aware of that, yes.
And I would say, for me, what inspires me to do it and to continue to do it is the communication, the prospect of communicating globally as well as just individually. That excites me. To be able to communicate with you with my pen, it makes me I'm so intimidated by a blank page and a full pen. Like, darn it, the pen's not out of ink. No excuses. And to be able to have this opportunity in a lifetime to communicate globally in the way music offers the opportunity to do, it's the best part of it.
And the pain of your life that goes into your music, I'd say our pain is your teacher. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That's fair to say.
Yeah.
But however, there's a paradox wrapped in a conundrum, wrapped in
enigma,
in irony, which is, I was walking through the streets of Portugal with some friends, and this group, this is when I was having a moment, and so I was recognized in the streets by, I don't know, there was 40, 50 people, and they were all, and kids, like pulling on my jacket, like, oh, and they were singing With My Own Two Hands. I have a song, I should never presume anyone knows what I'm doing. It's a song called With My Own Two Hands that I wrote, and it's super optimistic, and there's no song I'm more proud of. And they started singing the whole song With My Own Two Hands, and I'm going, wow, I've really made a positive impact. And then it segued, they went from that song into a song called Burn One Down that I've written about smoking weed, and then I went, oh. And that one was even louder, and I went, what have I done? So sometimes that communication is in conflict, direct conflict with itself, but it's the communication component for me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So you guys mentioned Muddy and Taj Mahal as big influences and guys who kind of brought you along. Curious if you've got any good stories about younger guys you might be particularly proud of having brought along yourselves.
I'd have to say Jack Johnson, because I went from seeing him in the front row of a show to getting his demo tape, to playing on one of his first songs called Flake. And he must have opened, I think the first shows he ever played on the world stage were opening for myself and the Innocent Criminals. And to see him just launch into the ether from that has been a permanent source of accomplishment. I just feel a certain sense, whenever I see him doing anything great, and everything he does is great, I always take a certain sense of pride in seeing that.
Can you talk a little bit more about the title track? And it's such, when I heard it it just grabbed me at the heart, and wanted to get your insights a little bit more about some of the lyrics and the power and the meaning and message behind it.
Well, the songs initially, the first verse for the song was written in honor and memoriam of Charlie's mom. I know Charlie and I don't want to speak to something that isn't,
okay,
but something that happened in Charlie's life affected me to the point where I had to write it, and then the song spread from that verse into what is the song No Mercy in This Land. And I brought the song to Charlie to check in with him because it was so heavy and it affected me so deeply. I had to put it on paper, but it was Charlie's life that I was writing, so it's something you could see where that's fragile. And Charlie said it was okay. I mean, he let it live. He let me do it.
Thank you.
Charlie, can you talk about how, because I understand, like you can see that it's a delicate, sensitive thing, but what was it like hearing the lyrics that he wrote about that?
Well, I didn't want to keep the death of my mother and the way she was murdered buried in me, because then it would just fester. I was afraid, and like have an effect on me mentally. So I like to be able to just talk about it at the time as appropriate, and to have it in a song really makes it, I don't know the word to say, special isn't the word I want to say, but it lets it breathe and puts the sun on it and lets it not kill me so I can deal with it, in a nutshell.
And was it always the plan to have him sing those lines?
No, that was Ben's idea.
Well, it was a bit of a subversive tactic in that I had the song, and he said, "Hey, Charlie, I've got this song, and is there anything in this song that you'd want to sing, maybe?" You know, like I just kind of brought it to him. I didn't make anything of it. I just presented him the song when it was done, and said, "I'd love to duet this with you, if you're comfortable." Mm-hmm. And Charlie just picked his lines and let's get to it.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me write it.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you guys for doing it.
Thank you so much.